With the second pick in the 2024 NBA draft, the Wizards selected who they hoped would become their next franchise cornerstone, Alex Sarr. As a 19-year-old big coming out of France, he possessed a unique set of raw physical tools and skills that, with the right development, suggested he could one day turn into the ideal modern-day five. Standing 7 feet tall with great length, verticality, and mobility, the selling point with Sarr was his defensive versatility, and that stood out a few different times throughout his rookie season, executing tons of different coverages, switching onto multiple positions, and blocking shots at a high rate, even if his positioning and discipline lacked a good bit behind recent Thule bigs like Evan Mobley or Chet Holmgren. On offense, the hype was mostly about that size and athleticism as a finisher, but also some wing skills such as a developing handle, jumper, and overall touch. Year 1 was all about figuring out what works and what doesn't, and everything good came in short stints. Take the outside shooting for example. He was one of only 5 centers to attempt at least 5 threes a game last season, but of that group, he was far and away the least accurate. Almost all of his threes were created for him, most of them open, yet he still made less than 31%. The main problem was consistency. He had one great month that helped his averages quite a bit, but there were 4 different months where he actually found himself in the 20s, so the three-point shot was more of a counter or a way to add space to the offense as opposed to a go-to scoring option. Unfortunately for Sarr individually though, he was reliant on those shots for his scoring, accounting for nearly half of his overall field goal attempts. When the three ball was falling, he'd hit decent highs like when he scored 34 in Denver or 24 a couple weeks later in Philly. For the most part, it wasn't falling though, so he only had 1 month shooting above 40% from the field while hovering anywhere from 10 to 15 points a game. All that's to say, these are the things that have changed. Through the first 16 games of this season, his three-point attempts are way down, and he's replaced those shots with layups or dunks, which he's converting at a much higher rate. As a result, his efficiency is way up across the board, and now we're looking at a legitimate 20-point threat. So what's the cause for this leap? Is it something he can sustain, or is it just a small sample, and what is his ceiling as a player? The biggest adjustment for Sarr heading into year 2 has been a mental one. He's just looked way more aggressive and assertive playing around the basket. Instead of shying away from added contact or being turned away by help, he's leaning into his physical tools. That stands out with the way he's fighting on the offensive glass, especially when following his own misses for second chance points. It's even more noticeable out of pick and roll though. Here's a play from last year where the Bulls put 2 on the ball, leaving him with a 4-on-3 advantage. When Patrick Williams steps over to help, he immediately picks up his dribble and settles for a floater. Now compare that to a play from this year. The Mavs put 2 on the ball, and instead of Patrick Williams, it's Anthony Davis stepping over to meet him. And instead of a floater, it's a power dribble right into the chest of Davis to create a quality look at the rim. Not only is he more willing to initiate contact, he just looks a lot stronger. And when he goes to these power dribbles, for the most part, it's effective. That's not to say he's perfect. Sometimes he finds himself in a position where the power dribble would create a layup, only to avoid contact and settle for a much tougher look. You'll also see plays like this where he looks to use his body to create separation, but lacks the power to move sturdier defenders, which is hopefully the next big step. Further development is going to be all about continuing to fill out his frame and adding even more strength. That means he's going to have to be locked into the gym and watching what supplements he puts into his body. I know for me personally, workouts and natural supplements are a huge part of my routine, which is why I'm super excited to tell you about today's sponsor, Transparent Labs. While many nutrition brands include things that you don't want to put in your body like artificial sweeteners or dyes, Transparent Labs is straightforward about the fact that their products only include natural ingredients. Everything is third-party tested and certified for purity and safety, so you know exactly what you're putting in your body, whether it's a pre-workout, their grass-fed whey protein isolate, or one of their many other supplements. I've been using their s'mores flavored protein powder, which not only takes my fitness to the next level, it genuinely tastes great. And if you're looking for supplements to optimize your health and wellness, I've got a special limited time offer for you. Right now, they're offering 25% off site-wide, as well as a free bundle over $149. All you have to do is either click the link in the description or scan the QR code on your screen. This offer is only available until December 3rd, so make sure to take advantage while you can. If Sarr can get just a little bit stronger and a little bit more deliberate with the way he uses his body in the paint, there's not much stopping him from being one of the game's best interior finishers. Because while he still has room for improvement, the steps he's already taken at his age have opened up so much for Washington's offense. Since entering the league, he's had nice instincts as a pick and roll big, specifically when it comes to slipping screens and going up quick off the catch. Like I said earlier though, he's starting to lean into his physical tools a lot more, and I mean that in every way. He's rolling harder, he's dunking the ball a lot more, and he's using his unique combination of length and athleticism to finish through traffic consistently. This makes him a difficult cover in the two-man game. If defenses want to switch to keep him from rolling, now he's doing a much better job of establishing inside position for low post buckets. If defenses want to put two on the ball, now the low man either has to pick him up early or be a legitimate rim protector. And this pairs well with maybe his most underrated skill, his connective passing. Because if he gets turned away before he gets to the paint, more times than not, he'll find the open man with a quick extra feed. For this reason, I view him as the type of player whose game is actually probably handicapped a little bit with the current roster. He's at his best playing with an advantage, and a weak point for the Wizards right now is consistent advantage creation, especially in the backcourt. In these spots, I think another improvement for him could be a more reliable floater, making him more of a scoring threat from the middle of the floor, but as I touched on earlier, part of what makes him unique is that in addition to the downhill game, he can also pop out for the jumper. Although he's far from an elite shooter, defenses respect him just enough to at least offer some value as a floor spacer. This means he affects the geometry of the court. It's harder for his defender to rotate down to the rim if he's at the top of the key, freeing up the paint for driving and cutting lanes. They take advantage of this added space by running a lot of their offense through Sarr on the perimeter, where he'll set up all sorts of action. Because he's a pretty good passer, this is where they get a lot of their best offense, as he's more than capable of sneaking the ball through tight windows to create quality opportunities. Then, of course, as soon as his defender drops back to protect the paint from those cutters, he's a good enough shooter to counter. This part of his game is far from perfect. He's not an elite passer and can be relatively turnover prone, but it's far enough along to be a legitimate source of offense, and it not only enables him to make decisions, it puts him in a position to attack with the ball. Maybe the biggest question with Sarr moving forward is just how much juice he has as a creator. The selling point would be that his size, length, and fluidity make him a uniquely difficult cover in space, and that comes and goes in flashes. For the most part though, these reps look extremely raw right now, so it's all about figuring out where he can make a tangible improvement. I do think some low-hanging fruit for him is continuing to initiate or embrace contact, because he does still have a tendency to shy away from physicality on drives, resulting in very few trips to the free throw line. There's just a difference in comfort level depending on who's defending him. Against a wing, his length is just overwhelming, easily working his way to the basket for a high percentage shot. But against a big just a couple minutes later, he no longer has that advantage, and he's forced to settle for a much tougher jumper. When he's matched up with a sturdier defender, it's all about winning with his mobility, but there's not a lot working for him in these spots. Firstly, he lacks explosive bursts, so it's difficult for him to get all the way around defenders from a standstill. Secondly, his handle is pretty loose, so he's not always in control of where he wants to go with the ball. Then the third and most prominent issue is that he clearly doesn't process the floor at a high level when he's putting his head down to create for himself. You'll see plenty of plays where he's actually able to gain the advantage with his length and mobility, only to completely squander it with an unnecessary move or even a lack of a necessary one. A lot of his isolations look rushed, like he overcommits to one angle or move, then doesn't really have another counter up his sleeve. For example, when his drive gets cut off here, he does a great job of dropping a shoulder and spinning into a new lane. But the move feels predetermined because when Allen sticks with him, he just tries to force it up anyways. Instead, I think the sequence works if after the spin, Sarr takes a couple of deceleration steps to throw Allen off balance, and it's not like he lacks the capability to pull that off. Later that night, he lost Allen with this exact setup, and it resulted in a layup. Instead of reading his defender and reacting in real time to create separation, he tends to look for one counter, and if that counter gets shut off, he isn't really able to adjust. Take this play. By attacking the middle of the floor, he's able to get Drummond off balance, then he spins baseline and either has a wide open layup or dunk. But he had already decided he'd fake the spin and turn back to the middle. Speaking of which, those spins are pretty much his go-to for every single drive, and good defenders pick up on that. So instead of creating lanes to the basket, he often has to turn back into those tougher turnaround jumpers. The reality is that a large percentage of his reps as a creator turn into these low percentage, awkward spinning middies. And while he has the size, footwork, and most importantly the touch to convert on these shots, you'd much rather see them used as a release valve at the end of the clock instead of a shot he's consistently looking to go to with the ball in his hands. So as far as perimeter isolations go, you'd have to take some major leaps in order for them to result in good team offense. Which means that in order for him to be a legitimate creator, it'd probably have to come with his back to the basket. But in these spots, he runs into a lot of the same issues. A high center of gravity, not a ton of strength or control, and settling for tough shots. It also doesn't help that he tends to get tunnel vision in these spots, missing open teammates after drawing attention, which correlates with those processing concerns I talked about. Like I said, he's gotten a lot better at using his size to attack mismatches, especially when it comes to sealing off position deep in the paint, although that feels like more of a counter than a source of creation. And to be honest, that's kind of my takeaway when it comes to Sarr's offensive development. I think he'll get stronger, improve his handle and decision making, but he's also got long-term flaws that could be a handicap moving forward. Essentially, everything would have to go right for him to develop into a legitimate presence as a creator, so I view this as more of a specialized option for Washington's offense. If he has an advantage to attack or a mismatch, you can rely on him to capitalize. For the most part though, his creation would be more limited to the role of a playmaking hub, operating in the middle of the floor and setting up action. Then you can lean into everything that makes him a good offensive player, like the floor spacing, finishing, and connective passing. After all, that's still a very valuable skill set, and more importantly, it translates to high-level playoff basketball. It likely wouldn't be enough to make him an all-star, which is where the other side of the floor comes into play. For all of the offensive tools, the selling point with Sarr, like most young bigs, is still defense first. It's all about length and fluidity, whether that means covering ground, switching onto the perimeter, or of course blocking shots. As a rookie, he averaged 1.5 blocks per game, good for 8th in the league, but everything else was still pretty raw. His positioning could be a bit off at times, which along with a lack of defensive help left him vulnerable in the primary action. This meant that while he was good at contesting shots and altering them around the basket, he wasn't actually good at turning them away altogether. With the lack of deterrence, he could struggle closing possessions on the glass, and naturally his lack of lower body strength meant physicality could be a problem at times. It can't be overstated just how much he's improved in each of those areas. His positioning has been way better to the point where he actually looks like a one-man defense in the paint at times. He's even improved a bit as a shot blocker, ranking 3rd in the league with his average of 2 blocks a game. He's been better on the glass, he's fouling less, and the added sturdiness has just turned him into a completely different level of interior presence. The key though is that he hasn't lost anything that made him unique, still moving with the same level of mobility and fluidity needed to cover tons of ground, execute different coverages, switch across the board, and offer resistance wherever he's at on the court. The next step for him defensively is figuring out how to be disruptive with his hands. He's got the length and agility to put himself in disruptive spots, but doesn't make many plays, and I think adding that to his arsenal could take him to an entirely different level when playing the gaps or defending the pick and roll. Besides that, what we're seeing right now is the actualization of Alex Sarr as a prospect. He's only 20 years old and already looks like he's capable of anchoring a defense. In a similar vein to the offense, as the Wizards add more talent around him, we could be looking at an all-defensive type of big. If he never adds more to his game on either side of the ball, this feels like a pretty decent floor. A switchable defensive anchor who can finish plays, space the floor, and legitimately initiate offense. With an improved handle, a little bit more strength, and further mental growth, I think we're looking at a guy with serious all-star potential.